This is the fourth program on the Israel of God, and thus far we at Hearing the Truth are very unimpressed with the dispensational view of Israel. By now, it should be apparent to the audience that with every new show, we are dismantling the dispensational delusion, and today we're going to dismantle even more of that system. Right, DS?
That's right, Mike. Once again, we at Hearing the Truth are delighted to dismantle the dispensational delusion of foolishness. Foolishness made to appear as serious theology by living hot dogs. And I mean living hot dogs in suits and ties, teaching the Jesuit science of destroying the Protestant Reformation. If by now it is not clear to the leaders of dispensationalism that they are in a system destined for destruction, if by now they cannot hear the truth, then it is time that they hose out their ears with pressure water from a pressure hose. Am I trying to be cruel in what I am saying? No. I am absolutely sick and tired of seeing good people and real Christians being sucked into that grand deception by big televangelists who live in opulence and would rather live comfortably, teaching a lie than humble themselves.
Yes, if they taught the truth, then that would mean giving up a lot of wealth. They'd have to live more average lives. You and I both know they can't step down several notches in the world to be more humble. To them, the Left Behind series is the key to owning private jets and million-dollar homes with bowling alleys and other irrelevancies.
Ultimately, Mike, the Left Behind series, being the voice of the false prophet, is the key to hell. And we must warn the world of the disaster that awaits everyone in the name of militant, dispensational Christian Zionism, a religion that is focused on real estate and finances wars for oil profits to finance the Judeo-Christian-based world order under the papal Caesar in Rome. The whole thing, everything they are, say, and do are lies stacked upon lies that cover lies, while the covered lies are covering more lies. While at the top of worldwide Mount Carmel stands the dispensational leaders with the Pope, while the Pope pats them on the head saying, good boys, let us go into the Vatican and plan our next step in deceiving the American public and the world, to go into the Third World War in the name of Zionism.
Rome is very pleased with dispensationalism. Very pleased. Today, I think we definitely need to discuss the dispensational love of real estate and military power.
The dispensational love of real estate and war is exactly the ignominy that the religion of the false prophet dwells in. Let's take a look at an article from Dr. Stephen R. Sizer.
Yes, who is that?
Let me quote the site. Dr. Stephen Sizer is the vicar of Christ Church, Virginia Water, Surrey. He is acting chairman of Living Stones, chairman of the International Bible Society UK, and an area tutor at the School of Theology, Westminster College, Oxford. He has written 3 books: Panorama of the Bible Lens, In the Footsteps of Jesus and the Apostles, and Christian Zionism, Roadmap to Armageddon. Now, in the article, Whose Promised Land? Israel and Bible Prophecy, September 12, 2007, Sizer brings into focus some important issues. We are going to read a portion of what he has said. We read, there are 2 essential questions I want to try and answer this morning, one political and one theological. They are multifaceted and interwoven. The political question is this: how should we as Christians view the situation in Israel-Palestine today, where 2 peoples claim the same territory? Is Israel a democracy or an apartheid state? Specifically, do we believe the Israeli authorities should continue to resist Palestinian aspirations to autonomy and statehood? Should they continue to occupy, settle, and annex more and more of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, creating small, urban Bantustan reservations for Palestinians living under military occupation within an exclusive Jewish state? Or do we believe that the Palestinians have fundamental human rights and freedoms enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? For example, to live in the land of their birth, to freedom of movement, to work, education, and religious practice, and collectively to the right of self-determination, political expression, autonomy, and nationhood. Then Sizer says, "May I say at this point that I oppose anti-Semitism, remembering also that the Arabs are a Semitic race also, and I do affirm the right of the State of Israel to exist within secure but internationally recognized borders. That is the essential political question."
According to dispensational Zionists, the Palestinians have no rights to the West Bank and Gaza. Dispensationalists believe that all that land belongs to the chosen people. But who are the chosen people? Ephesians chapter 1 shows that Christians are the chosen people. Galatians 3, verse 28 and 29 shows that Abraham's seed consists of Christians, regardless of race. Matthew 5, verse 5 tells us that the meek shall inherit the earth, not Gaza in the West Bank.
That is very significant, and let me show you. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 through 16 says something very important that we should pay close attention to. Let's begin with verse 13. These, meaning people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Notice that, strangers and pilgrims on the earth. 14. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. 15. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. 16. But now they desire a better one, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Mike, the patriarchs, Old Testament saints, as well as the New Testament saints, seek a heavenly country. And all of God's people from both testaments will inherit the earth made new. We are not told to look for a piece of real estate over where pseudo-Jerusalem now sits.
DS, all that commotion over in Palestine has nothing to do with God's plan. Rather, it is the plan of the sea beast and two-horned beast. The Palestinians have been raped by a country with the name Israel, which is not the Israel of God, and the fake state of Israel has stolen land and killed people. Dispensationalists say that Israel has a right to defend themselves, but I really don't see that self-defense. Rather, I see Israeli expansion on someone else's land. In other words, theft.
Yes, I agree. And when it comes to land theft and expansion, Noam Chomsky does not agree with the Israeli government. Who is that man? Who is this man? Wikipedia tells us that he is, quote, an American linguist, philosopher, political activist, author, and lecturer. He is an institute professor and professor of linguistics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Beginning with his critique of the Vietnam War in the 1960s, Chomsky has become more widely known for his media criticism and political activism, and for his criticism of the foreign policy of the United States and other governments. According to the Arts and Humanities Citation Index in 1992, Chomsky was cited as a source more often than any other living scholar during the 1980s through 1992 time period, and was the 8th most cited scholar in any time period, end of quote.
That sounds to me like he's someone worth listening to.
Yes, now a moment ago you said dispensationalists believe that Israel has a right to defend themselves. They do believe that. But is the Israeli government really defending itself? Go ahead and play the Chomsky clip on Israel's self-defense.
When Israel in the occupied territories now claim that they have to defend themselves, they are defending themselves in the sense that any military occupier has to defend itself against the population they're crushing.
Prime Minister Ariel Sharon justified the siege as self-defense.
You can't defend yourselves when you're militarily occupying somebody else's land. That's not defense. Call it what you like, it's not defense.
He's absolutely right. You can't defend yourself when you're occupying someone else's land.
Exactly. That's not self-defense. I think it would be well to consider the following information from Charles E. Carlson, president of Straight Gate Ministries. Under the title British Lords, Homeless Folks, and a Phony Bible, and in the article We Hold These Truths, January 2006, Carlson does not seem to be thrilled with the problems over in Israel. We read, "The British gift of someone else's land was the beginning of the endless wars with Arabs on one side pitted against Jews, Zionist Christians, and the U.S. government on the other side. It is one of the most lopsided mismatches in the history of genocide, equivalent to a staged Roman slaughter of humans by lions. The question that must be asked is, why do professing Christians allow themselves to be drawn into an unscriptural shedding of innocent blood, not to mention land theft? American Christians provided the margin of victory for Zionism. They alone provided the moral excuse for the slaughter, and in so doing it stands against everything we are taught in Jesus' words about the absolute obligation to protect the least of our brothers. The war in the Middle East, as anyone with one eye can see, is an indecent mismatch beyond civilized imagination. It is understandable that Jewish synagogues might support it, but why do Christian churches stand for brutality against the weak? Answer: because it is required by their religion."
Carlson stated the matter factually. American Christianity is working to support both theft and slaughter, and I can guarantee that it is dispensationalism that is foremost in supporting the Israeli occupation of stolen land.
That's precisely what Carlson argues in the following. We read, "The Balfour Declaration was not enough to make the state of Israel a political reality in a world dominated by a substantially biblically aware America. Zionism's founders stated they needed broad American support, else their venture would fail. The new Zionist-friendly Christianity was hatched from eggs laid by its European predecessors, primarily Edward Irving and John Nelson Darby. Its purpose was, unknown to its followers, to make Zionist land theft biblically legal and morally acceptable. To do this, Zionists needed a rewritten Bible that would make the state of Israel a necessary precursor to the imminent return of Christ to planet Earth. The idea was to make Jesus Christ's return to Earth imminent and to make Jesus' return to Earth dependent upon the Jews' return to the land of the Philistines first. All world Zionism had to do was write such a Bible and sell it to enough of Christ's followers. The neo-Christian Zionists would at first simply accept the erroneous notion that the Bible predicted a political state of Israel and Palestine. As time went on, those who accepted it would be taught to accept mass deportation and murder of the Arabs to secure the real estate upon which Christ would someday very soon set up an earthly rule called a millennial kingdom. In the dispensational scheme, Zionists were to be allowed the role of custodianship of the land until Jesus decided he needed it, at which time the Israeli Jews would be out of luck, out of land again, and would be slaughtered as well. This unhappy ending for world Judaism did not worry the Zionists because it served their purpose, and they did not believe it anyway. Now follow what Carlson says here very carefully concerning this Zionist dispensational theology. We continue. It was perfected in the Schofield Reference Bible, and it is also precisely the message that is sold in tens of millions of pulp fiction left behind books written by Tim LaHaye's Enterprises, as well as by 1,000 other similar Rapture and Armageddon authors over the last 90 years. The Schofield Reference Bible is the transparent Bible forgery for changing fundamental Christianity into Rothschild Zionism. Today, it shamefully dominates the Bible colleges and seminaries, beginning with the Moody Bible Institute and Dallas Theological Seminary and pulpits of evangelical churches of America.
That is very well said. Carlson stated that matter well. Dispensational theology became a means to biblically justify theft, murder, and mass deportation of Arabs. But there is no real biblical justification for that nonsense, as we have demonstrated in the Israel of God parts 1 to 3. The Khazars can dream all day long that they are the chosen people, but in reality, they are no more chosen than someone in South America. Only Christians who have given themselves completely to Christ are Abraham's seed. To be Abraham's seed is not determined by genetics, but by a spiritual relationship with the Lord. Clearly, dispensationalism and that ridiculous Schofield Bible are the causes of much wickedness.
Oh, I know. In another article titled "The Zionist Created Schofield Bible," Carlson says this. We read, "This unchristian anti-Arab theology has permitted the theft of Palestine and 54 years of death and destruction against the Palestinians, with hardly a complaint from the Judeo-Christian mass media evangelists or most other American church leaders. We thank God for the exceptions. Christian Zionism may be the most bloodthirsty apostasy in the entire history of Christianity or any other religion. Shame on its leaders. They have already brought the blood of untold numbers of innocent people down upon the spires and prayer benches of American churches."
No wonder dispensationalists teach the law is abolished. They need an excuse to covet the Palestinians' land, to steal the land and kill to achieve their objective. And what amazes me is that dispensationalists think that true Christianity hinges on one's willingness to support the state of Israel, even if it means committing great atrocities. As we have seen in another program, John Hagee is foremost in influencing people to support the state of Israel. Let me play a clip from Hagee.
I came here tonight to speak about Christians united for Israel and millions of evangelicals in America who have a deep-seated faith-based belief to love Israel, to speak up for Israel, to stand up for Israel, to pray for Israel, and to financially support Israel.
Yes, I know all about John Hagee and his Zionist dispensational ways of thinking. Now I think we should listen to Noam Chomsky talk about Israel and foreign policy.
Right, Professor, you'd mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian situation a moment ago before Anwar's question, and I want to get an email to you that came from Andrew Leidner in the United States, who says, "You are Jewish. If Israel is destroyed, what part will you have played in it, and will you give yourself a pat on the back when it is?"
Well, I've felt for many years, and have written, incidentally, that the people who call themselves supporters of Israel are in reality supporters of Israel's moral degeneration and probably ultimate destruction. I mean, Israel can have security. In fact, that's been true for over 30 years. It has chosen instead expansion at the cost of security. I can go through the reasons if you want to know.
Probably we're short on time and a couple of callers waiting, so better to...
Okay, but that means that, I agree with my Israeli friends who think that the policies they're taking are extremely first of all, wrong, but also self-destructive, and that if they do pursue security and peace instead of expansion and oppression, their prospects are very much improved.
Those who call themselves supporters of Israel are really supporters of Israel's moral degeneration and ultimate destruction. Dispensationalism is, by nature, a morally bankrupt theology that teaches the law is abolished. Thus, they can promote genocide in the Middle East under the pretext of supporting the chosen people.
Unfortunately, that is the case. The author and journalist Grace Halsell states the matter clearly. Concerning the Christian Zionist message, we read, "What is the message of the Christian Zionist? Simply stated, it is this: every act taken by Israel is orchestrated by God and should be condoned, supported, and even praised by the rest of us."
Man, that is so dumb.
Yes, it is dumb. Never mind what Israel does, says the Christian Zionists. God wants this to happen. This includes the invasion of Lebanon, which killed or injured an estimated 100,000 Lebanese and Palestinians, most of them civilians. The bombing of sovereign nations such as Iraq. The deliberate brutalizing of the Palestinians, breaking bones, shooting children, and demolishing homes. And the expulsion of Palestinian Christians and Muslims from a land they have occupied for over 2,000 years. And that comes from the article, Israeli Extremist and Christian Fundamentalists, the Alliance.
Christian Zionists, as well as the Israeli government, make the issue a one-sided argument. They get upset when an Arab or Palestinian extremist blows up people, buildings, or vehicles in modern-day Israel. Dispensationalists and the Israeli government don't want to face the facts that such attacks are provoked and that the Israeli government itself has been involved in terrorism.
That is correct. Take the author I just cited a moment ago. Halsell, back in March 2000, wrote an article concerning assaults on the mosque, which describes Israeli terrorism. Let's read. For 3 decades, Gershon Solomon, a militant Israeli who leads an organization dedicated to the destruction of Jerusalem's most holy Islamic shrine, has led Zionist zealots in armed assaults on the Muslim grounds of Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary, that encloses both the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. No Israeli political leader has spoken out against the assaults on the mosque, holy to 1 billion Muslims around the world. Moreover, no Israeli rabbi has condemned them. Indeed, beginning in 1967, many of the assaults were led by Jewish rabbis. Beginning in 1967, when Israel military seized Arab East Jerusalem, Jewish terrorists on more than 100 occasions have laid siege to the Muslim mosque. Now, from this point on, Halsell demonstrates a long list of Israeli terrorism. Now, prior to the list of attacks Halsell demonstrates, she says something very important. Let's read. The dispensationalist doctrine, less than 200 years old, pervades Assemblies of God, Pentecostal, and other charismatic churches, as well as the 16 million-member Southern Baptist Convention and countless so-called Bible churches and megachurches. It's estimated that at least 1 out of every 10 Americans is a devotee of this cult. In both Israel and the U.S., a conspiracy of silence reigns as militants lay siege to the Jerusalem mosque. No political leader or religious leader in Israel or the U.S. has addressed the issue. In the case of Israeli rabbis, if they themselves have not aided and abetted planned assaults on the mosque, they have kept silent. In the case of all major U.S. Christian church leaders, the voices that are heard throughout the land, if they themselves are not raising money to destroy the mosque, they keep silent about the conspiracy.
Well, I agree with that quote. In both Israel and the United States, a conspiracy of silence does exist. The conspiracy of silence is the cover-up of expansionism. The fact of the matter is, the American and Israeli occupation of the Middle East will only create problems.
Sizer realizes that. In an interview between him and the Daily News Egypt, February 20th, 2008, we can read the problems Sizer witnessed. Let's read. I was raised as a Christian by American evangelicals who were Zionists, and I did not know that there was anything wrong with that because it seemed very clear in the Bible that the Jews were the chosen people. The Bible can easily resonate with today. All those paradigms can be manipulated very easily in populist books to put a gloss on what's happening, and I was raised on all of that. It was only when I went to Palestine as a young minister determined to visit the Holy Land that I discovered the Palestinians, and initially I kept them at a distance. We were fed the line that the Arabs were terrorists, but then one day I got off of the bus and I discovered there was an Arab-Palestinian Anglican church in Palestine, and I discovered they were like me, worried about their children's education, where they would get their food from, and they had to deal with people rushing to hospitals, not because of a car accident, but because they had been shot by an Israeli soldier. That deeply troubled me. Then Sizer is asked a question. Aren't you worried about being appropriated by countries like Iran? Sizer says, I am well aware of that, but I think you have to run that risk. The Zionist lobby loves to manipulate what Ahmadinejad or the Ayatollahs say about Israel. I draw a distinction between rhetoric and action, and we can lament that Iran will not recognize Israel, but the fact is, Israel has never recognized Palestine. We may lament the fact that some Arabs have said we must drive the Jews into the sea, but the fact is, Israel is driving the Palestinians into the desert. So let's cut with the rhetoric and face the facts. And although we may not like what is being said, the fact is Israel is in breach of more UN resolutions than any other country in the world. We know that U.S. President George Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair led us down the garden path of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, yet the only country it could threaten was Israel. UK politicians are now admitting they went to war to protect Israel. If that was why we did it, okay, but then let us be honest and not say we did it for our own security. As long as Americans demonize the Arabs, eulogize about Israel, and continue to fund occupation, they shouldn't be surprised that there are small groups of Islamist terrorists who want to poke them in the eye. That was well said.
Yes, very well said. UK politicians are now admitting they went to war to protect Israel. In other words, U.S. expansion in Iraq is really for the good of the puppet state of Israel, so that the Israeli government can expand. And let us not forget, dispensationalists are foremost in influencing Washington to expand and reshape the Middle East into their ridiculous dispensational Zionist model.
Yes, Mike, let us not lose sight of that truth, and let us not lose sight of expansionism, which is costing thousands and thousands of people their lives. In the article, Birth Pains of a New Christian Zionism, August 8th, 2006, Max Blumenthal says this: over the past months, the White House has convened a series of off-the-record meetings about its policies in the Middle East with leaders of Christians United for Israel, CUFI, a newly formed political organization that tells its members that supporting Israel's expansionist policies is a, quote, biblical imperative, unquote. CUFI's Washington lobbyist David Brogg told me that during the meetings, CUFI representatives pressed White House officials to adopt a more confrontational posture toward Iran, refuse aid to the Palestinians, and give Israel a free hand as it ramped up its military conflict with Hezbollah.
That stupid organization, Christian United for Israel, is pressing Washington to fight Iran, accomplishing more expansion. And Diaz, I think you're already aware that John Hagee speaks out for that hopeless crusade. Let me play some of his clips from a prior show.
As you know, Iran poses a threat to the state of Israel that promises nothing less than a nuclear holocaust. I have been saying on national television, in churches and auditoriums across America, quote, it is 1938, Iran is Germany, and Ahmadinejad is the new Hitler. Ladies and gentlemen, we must stop Iran's nuclear threat and stop it now.
As we can see, Hagee thinks that Iran poses a serious threat to Israel and America. Let me also play this clip.
Iran's president has not limited his maniacal threats to Israel. He has also asked his fellow Iranians to imagine a world without America. This is a clear threat to destroy the United States of America.
The CUFI and the propaganda of John Hagee show that dispensational Zionism is a military Christianity whose focus is on expansionism and world domination. The war in Iraq and the focus on Iran are just more evidences of that problem.
Gaza and the West Bank are not enough for dispensationalists.
Mike, perhaps the whole Middle East is not enough for dispensationalists. Dispensationalism is literally in bed with the neoconservative fascist agenda. I like what Chomsky said at an interview on Lebanese TV, LBC, May 19th, 2006, where he was talking about American foreign policy. Let's play some of those clips.
That's a very important book.
No.
John Lewis Gaddis is a leading American historian.
No.
He wrote the first book on the roots of George Bush's foreign policy, and he traces it back to John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State and President in 1818. And he's a good historian. He cites the right sources, but he doesn't tell you what they say. In my recent book, Failed States, I go over this and I report what they say. Adams lied to Congress, lied to the population, and as the scholarly history says, set the principle that other presidents have followed ever since, carrying out violent and aggressive wars, lying to Congress, lying to the population, and continuing on the principle that expansion is the path to security. Well, by now it means expansion over the world. That's what the historical scholarly sources say. Gaddis cites them, but doesn't report their content.
According to Chomsky, Congress lies to the people and expansionism is U.S. policy. Well, I can agree with that. The Iraq War is nothing more than U.S. expansionism in the Middle East. Now I'm going to play the next clip.
Let's take Iraq. The United States and Britain invaded Iraq. The United States and Britain have been torturing the people of Iraq for decades. They both supported Saddam Hussein during his war against Iraq. They provided him with means to develop weapons of mass destruction. They supported him right through his worst atrocities against the Kurds. Long after the war with Iran, they supported him again when he crushed the Shiite rebellion that might have overthrown him. They then imposed brutal sanctions, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, devastated the society, probably prevented the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Then they invaded. They've turned a disaster into a monstrosity.
Yeah. What amazes me is the fact that the U.S. financed Saddam Hussein for the longest time. Then they turn around and eliminate him and occupy Iraq. Clearly, the U.S. is playing the Middle East like a chessboard.
Yes, the U.S. is playing the Middle East like a chessboard. I think we should take a few minutes to listen to Ron Paul's debate on Israel.
Okay, let's do that.
Congressman Paul, can we go back to the Middle East? You have said the United States should not be trying to broker peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Should the president even be there today, sir?
Well, if you followed my advice, yes, we wouldn't be there. We've been doing that for a good many years, and it hasn't seemed to come to success. No, I think if we weren't there, there'd be more incentives to come to a peaceful agreement. But we support both sides, not only with the Palestinians, but the Lebanese and all the Arab nations. We support Israel, and we try to have this balance. But I think it'd be much better to have a balance by being out of there. And I think there'd be a greater incentive for Israel and the Palestinian and all the Arab nations to come together and talk, because I think we get in the way too often of these. And besides, it's costing us a lot of money. It's costing us lives now. And it's time that we come to the point where we believe the world can solve some of their problems without us. And also, we're out of money. We can't do it any longer. We're going bankrupt. And the empires of the world have always ended badly through economic terms. So whether there are peace agreements over there, for instance, if we would stop all aids over there, we would stop 3 times as much aid as Israel gets to the Arab nations. Why do we arm the Arab nations? And they're the enemies of Israel. But we continue to do that. So why don't we trade with everybody and talk with them? And there's a greater incentive to work these problems out. I think if we'd have been out of there a lot sooner, there may well have been a much different settlement after the Kuwait invasion, because Israel was quite capable of working with moderate Arab nations. They tried to. None of the Arab nations wanted Saddam Hussein in Kuwait. And I think they could have taken care of Saddam Hussein back then and saved all the mess that we have now, because I think there are so many unintended consequences and way too much blowback.
Could I just make a comment? I'm not interested in trading with Al-Qaeda. All they want to trade is burqas. I don't want to travel with them. They like one-way tickets.
Governor Huckabee,
May I answer that? May I answer that?
Yes, Congressman. Go ahead.
I'm talking exactly about that, because that's what we've been doing. We used to support Saddam Hussein, and we used to be allied with Osama bin Laden, and what I want to do is stop that. Who are our friends one day turn out to be our enemies. Right now, we finally got rid of Saddam Hussein, and what are we doing now? We're rearming the Sunnis, the old henchmen of Saddam Hussein, and what are they going to do with this? All those weapons we're giving the Sunnis in Baghdad. So look out. Believe me, that war is not over, and right now they're demanding more troops in Afghanistan, and some people, like the senator, he thinks we should be there for 100 years if necessary. How can he commit the young people of this world 5 more generations to be in Iraq if it's necessary? I say it's time to come home.
There's a lot to hear in that debate. Ron Paul says that the U.S. financed Al-Qaeda and Saddam, and now the U.S. is financing the Sunnis. Moreover, Mr. Paul says that the U.S. gives money to Israel and the enemies of Israel. If that's not playing the Middle East like a chessboard, then what is? DS, when one understands this, it's not hard to realize that John Hagee's speech in Iran is just utter stupidity and nonsense.
Absolute nonsense. And I think we should listen to the clip on Ron Paul's speech concerning Iran.
All right.
This round of questions is going to be based on a scenario which we think is quite plausible, that any of you as president might well end up facing. It concerns Iran, and these are the circumstances. Its nuclear program has continued to advance. UN weapons inspectors have now saying that it appears that Iran is on the verge of being able to produce and even be producing nuclear weapons. Iran has suspended its cooperation with the UN nuclear agency and asked the inspectors to leave the country. Cross-border incidents in Iraq involving elements of the Revolutionary Guards have continued to increase and are a continuing problem for U.S. forces there and for the Iraqis as well. The UN Security Council has imposed some economic sanctions on Iran, but has refused to authorize the use of force against that country. In addition, the threats by Iran's leader against Israel have become more pronounced and more extreme. What do you do? Congressman Paul.
One thing I would remember very clearly is the president doesn't have the authority to go to war. He goes to the Congress.
So what do you do?
He goes to the Congress and finds out if there's any threat to our national security. And thinking back to the 1960s when I was in the Air Force for 5 years, and there was a Cold War going on, and the Soviets had 40,000, and we stood them down, and we didn't have to have a nuclear confrontation, I would say that we should go very cautiously. We should back off. We should be talking to Iran right now. We shouldn't be looking for the opportunity to attack them. They are, at the present time, according to the AEIA, cooperating, and by the end of the year, they're supposed to be willing to reveal all that they are doing. So instead of looking for this scenario where it is inevitable that we have to attack, I think we ought to be talking about how do you get along with some people that are deadly, like the Soviets and the Chinese and the many others. We don't have to resort to war every single time there's a confrontation. They are not a threat to Israel. Israel has 200 or 300 nuclear missiles, and they can take care of themselves. So you shouldn't assume that we have to jump in and go to war, and we certainly shouldn't do it without the consent of the Congress.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, he made his point well. Israel has somewhere around 300 nuclear missiles. Let's see here. The U.S. is allowed to have nukes. Israel is allowed to have nukes. Both the U.S. and Israel are allowed to expand in the Middle East. Everyone is supposed to accept this without argument. If the Palestinians and Arabs resist, Israeli and U.S. governments kill insurgents, including innocent civilians, and they call this self-defense while they occupy other people's territory. What an absolute disgrace. And to think American Christians support this nonsense in the name of protecting the chosen people who aren't even the chosen people. Diaz, this is expansionism accomplished by theft and murder to support racism.
It's almost despicable and sickening to think about that this kind of crap goes on.
Zionism is worthless.
Absolutely. Let us read a portion of the article, Dispensationalism and Racism by Thomas Williamson. We read, "What would you think of a religious sect that taught that there is one race that is by nature superior and another race that is by nature inferior? And suppose that this sect taught that the superior race has a divine right to dispossess members of the inferior race and take their properties without compensation, and to ethnically cleanse those who resist this expropriation using violence if necessary. And suppose that this sect believed so strongly in this system of racism and ethnic cleansing that it was willing to plunge the world into war in order to fulfill its objectives. And suppose that this sect claimed 70 million adherents in the world's most powerful nation and had a stronghold on the foreign policy of that nation, so that the military and financial might of that nation was directed toward the goal of helping the superior race and suppressing the inferior race. Welcome to the wonderful world of American dispensationalism."
Yes, it's not hard to see that what is taking place with Israel, the Palestinians, and the Arabs is ethnic cleansing. Dispensationalists support this tragedy with blindsided myopia and a complete disregard of human life. By what scriptural authority do Zionists support this? The whole Zionist movement and their actions contradict the words of Jesus in the New Testament.
Mike, the Zionist movement is not in harmony with Christ or the scriptures. They are in harmony with the Talmud, the oral traditions of the Jews. The very works of Zionism is in harmony with Talmudism. Let us ask, what is the problem with the Talmud? Let's talk about this. Nesta H. Webster illustrates one of the main problems in the Talmud. We read, "Nor can the insistence on the chosen people theory, which forms the basis of all Talmudic and Kabbalistic writings, be regarded as of purely Jewish origin. The ancient Egyptians likewise believed themselves to be the peculiar people specially loved by the gods. But in the hands of the Jews, this belief became a pretension to the exclusive enjoyment of divine favor, and that comes from the Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, page 13. Now, Webster points out where the chosen theory leads. We read, according to the Zohar, all Israelites will have a part in the future world, and on arrival, they will not be handed over like the Goyim, meaning non-Jewish races, to the hands of the angel Dauma and sent down to hell. Indeed, the Goyim are even denied human attributes. Thus, the Zohar again explains that the words of the scripture, Jehovah Elohim made man, means that he made Israel. And that comes from Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, page 13. Note this clearly. The belief that Israel after the flesh is above all other races and will enjoy the New Jerusalem without the Goyim, meaning non-Jews, or the belief that the Goyim will be servants of the Jews, is the product of the Talmud, which has its inspiration in paganism. The Talmud, meaning the oral Kabbalistic tradition of the Jews, has been shown by some writers to propagate the most odious racist views ever concocted by man. Lady Queenborough in Occult Theocracy quotes sections of the Talmud. Let's read. You are human beings, but the nations of the world are not human beings, but beasts. Next one. On the house of the Goy, one looks as on the fold of cattle. Next one. Those who do not own the Torah and the prophets must be killed. Who has power to kill them? Let him kill them openly with the sword. If not, let him use artifices till they are done away with. And if anybody wants to know the exact sections of the Talmud where this is coming from, go to Prophetic Tool Chest, chapter 11.
Yeah. The extra biblical books of junk I see again. That's very irritating. And to know that dispensationalists support this garbage.
Yes, absolute garbage. And many wonder why it's so easy for Zionists to support the theft of land owned by the Palestinians. To understand this, one just needs to see the following beliefs in the Talmud. We read, the estates of the Goys are like wilderness. Who first settles in them has a right to them. Next one, the property of the Goys is like a thing without a master. Next one, if a Jew has struck his spade into the ground of the Goy, he has become the master of the whole. Next one, that the Jewish nation is the only nation selected by God, while all the remaining ones are contemptible and hateful. That all property of other nations belongs to the Jewish nation, which consequently is entitled to seize upon it without any scruples. That an Orthodox Jew is not bound to observe principles of morality towards people of other nations, and on the contrary, he even ought to act against morality, if it were profitable for himself or for the interest of Jews in general. A Jew may rob a Goy. He may cheat him over a bill, which should not be perceived by him, otherwise the name of God would become dishonored.
No wonder it's no big thing for Zionists to support murder, theft, and the relocation of Arabs into the abyss. The Talmud says that that's the thing to do. Quote, that an Orthodox Jew is not bound to observe principles of morality towards people of other nations, and on the contrary, he even ought to act against morality if it were profitable for himself or for the interest of Jews in general, unquote. This is their thing to do. Now, do you see why those books of junk have been banned from the Bible? That's not the Word of God. And anyone who would think that it is should just go into their local hospital and request a frontal lobotomy of the brain. And to think that the American media covers the tracks of the worthless Talmud and the despicable fruits of it, arguing one-sided arguments.
Mike, I get so sick and tired of the one-sided arguments in our stupid and ridiculous media. If someone like Mel Gibson, for example, shoots so-called anti-Semitic words out of his mouth, he is called a racist and his character is deprecated all over the news. But none of the media idiots who are quick to label individuals as anti-Semitic even care care what the Talmud says. And the fact that that stupid book is still doctrine among pseudo-Jews who are not Semites by any stretch of the imagination, as Benjamin Friedman says.
Do dispensational Zionists even care that such teachings are in disharmony with Jesus and his messianic purpose in the new covenant?
No, because dispensationalists don't even believe Jesus came to be the Messiah. Play the clip from Hagee where he talks about his book in defense of Israel.
Yes, I'm getting real sick and tired of this John Hagee, but I'll play it anyway.
I'm delighted to present my latest book, In Defense of Israel. This book will expose the sins of the fathers and the vicious abuse of the Jewish people. In Defense of Israel will shake Christian theology. It scripturally proves that the Jewish people as a whole did not reject Jesus as Messiah. It will also prove that Jesus did not come to earth to be the Messiah. It will prove that there was a Calvary conspiracy between Rome, the high priest, and Herod to execute Jesus as an insurrectionist too dangerous to live. Since Jesus refused by word and deed to claim to be the Messiah, how can the Jews be blamed for rejecting what was never offered? Read it in this shocking expose, In Defense of Israel.
It should be called In Defense of John Hagee's Stupidity. I've seen so much scripture that contradicts the words of Hagee that we would have to talk about that issue on a separate program. But I'm astounded as to how unbiblical dispensationalism is. Dispensationalism is not New Testament Christianity, but Talmudism. And this is precisely why they can so easily support the unfruitful works of darkness.
To deny Jesus as the Messiah and to deny the present-day existence of the New Covenant brings intelligent Bible students to the conclusion that dispensationalism is truly a system of the Antichrist.
The word there is intelligent.
Right.
Only the intelligent Bible students, not cattle ranch brainless yo-yoers who know the truth but believe lies.
Absolutely.
DS, I've heard you argue that mental illness in most cases is not scientifically observable, but I think now we have a real case of mental illness. It's called dispensationalism.
Yes, Mike, we have finally found real mental illness, dispensationalism. I think the Psychological Society should rewrite DSM-4, TR, meaning Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They should rewrite it. They should completely change it. And they should list one mental illness as dispensationalism. Then they should list the symptoms. Some of the symptoms being desire to covet their neighbor's land and oil, desire to steal land, and desire to kill to get the land, bellowing about abortion being murder while supporting the death of thousands and thousands of Palestinians, being men, women, and children, bellowing about anti-Semitic Nazis while supporting racism in the form of a present, quote, non-existent, unquote, chosen race of Jews, bellowing about America's immorality and the removal of the Ten Commandments from courthouses while teaching that the Ten Commandments are abolished. An absolute oxymoron. I could picture having an office with well-trained, sane people, and when anyone demonstrates beliefs of the above stupidity, we tell them, you have a mental disease, dispensationalism. Treatment is to give up that heaping pile of manure. If you do not, your prognosis is not good. You will achieve complete madness and insanity, and eventually hell.
Right, DS, we've been through this dispensational dismantling over and over and over again. Not only on this particular series, The Israel of God, but in your book, Prophetic Tool Chest, and on all the other shows we have done at Hearing the Truth. If, after all we have said and done, and all the common sense in the world brought out into the light on this matter, if, after all this, there are still people out there who believe in dispensationalism and whatever the media may suggest is correct, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. Now, I'm speaking to our listeners here. Listeners, if you are one of those people, you are definitely suffering from mental illness. And I feel sorry for you guys.
Tell it like it is.
I must say that after looking at all the issues over the months, I can't help but feel annoyed by all the ignorance prevailing in Western Christianity. I can't emphasize the issue enough that the state of Israel is by no means a fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
No, the state of Israel is pseudo, but nevertheless, dispensationalists like to make Romans chapter 11, verses 25 to 27 the proof texts that the physical nation of Israel will once again be reestablished.
It will, huh? Yeah, I've heard that argument. I think we should finalize today's program by dealing with that issue.
Sounds good. Let's read Romans 11:25 through 27, and let's discuss its true meaning first. Verse 25, For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. 26, And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, The deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. 27, For this is my covenant with them when I will take away their sins. Dispensationalists see in these texts a promise that national Israel will be saved after the church dispensation. This is not in harmony with the theme of Romans chapter 9 through 11, or Galatians, or the New Testament for that matter. Now, up to verse 25 in Romans chapter 11, the message is that unbelieving Jews have been broken off of the olive tree. Believing Jews stay in the olive tree, while Gentile believers are grafted in. In other words, Israel as a nation, rejecting the Messiah and his gospel, does not constitute the olive tree, because Israel as a nation is not connected to the, quote, root and fatness of the tree, unquote, and that's verse 17 of Romans 11. Now let's look at verses 25 and 26 again and highlight a few Greek words. Verse 25, For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until, now the Greek there is akri, and it means as far as or up to, until the fullness. The Greek there is pleroma, and it means a filling up. So we read that blindness in part has happened to Israel until, as far as or up to, the fullness, meaning the filling up of the Gentiles, has come in. 26, and so, the Greek there is haudos, and it means in this manner, and so, in this manner, all Israel will be saved, as it is written, The deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Verse 25 tells us that national Israel has experienced a partial blindness until, meaning as far as or up to, the fullness, meaning the filling up of the Gentiles, has come in. Romans chapter 11 verse 12 says, Now if the fall of them, meaning natural Israel, be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? So what is the significance of verse 12 in comparison with verses 25 and 26? Romans chapter 11 verse 12 explains that the fullness of Israel is fulfilled in the riches of the Gentiles. Paul places the salvation of Israel in a unicinous relationship with that of the Gentiles. Now, this filling up of the Gentiles is in perfect correlation with Acts 15 verses 14 through 17, which states that God taking out of the Gentiles a people for his name was the projected hope of the prophets. Romans chapter 11 verse 25, in correlation with the preceding verses from verse 11 all the way to 24 in the 11th chapter of Romans, explain that both Jew and Gentile being grafted in the olive tree through the gospel is the filling up of Israel. Verse 26 confirms this by saying, And so all Israel will be saved, as it is written, meaning in this manner all Israel will be saved.
What does Romans 11:25 and 26 mean? All Israel will be saved by means of the gathering of both Jews and Gentiles together into Christ through the gospel. Romans 9 verses 6 to 8 explain the definition of all Israel as not pertaining to the flesh, but of those who are children of the promise. As we have already analyzed in Galatians, this pertains to those who become a new creation in Christ. In other words, all Israel is the olive tree containing both Jew and Gentile, and the filling up of Israel will continue as far as the time when Jesus comes to take his people to heaven. This was Paul's projective understanding of Israel's salvation, that through Christ, through the Christian period, Israel's restoration would be fulfilled in the growth of the church. This is why Galatians 3 verses 28 and 29 says, There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise.
Yes, Mike. And notice that Romans chapter 11, verses 25 and 26 demonstrate that natural Israel's blindness exists until the complete filling up of the Gentiles, meaning national Israel plays no important role. National Israel is moot while the olive tree containing all kinds of people becomes more complete until the end. In this way, the all Israel of God will be saved.
That's very clear. The filling up of believers in one body is how all Israel will be saved.
That's right, and I think for the sake of emphasis, we should ask, how does Paul prove that, quote, in this manner all Israel will be saved, unquote? Meaning the filling up of believers in one body? How does Paul prove that in that manner all Israel will be saved? He quotes from the hope of Isaiah 59:20, which says, "And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord." Paul also quotes from Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, where it says that in the new covenant, God will no longer remember their sins and iniquities. Now, from Isaiah's point of view, chapter 59, verse 20 was completely fulfilled in Christ's first advent. Paul recoined the words "to Zion" in Isaiah to the words "from Zion" in order to illustrate that the deliverer had already come to Zion with salvation. The deliverer came to Zion and turned ungodliness away from Jacob on the cross of Calvary, because Jesus came to redeem all men, both Jew and Gentile. Israel as a nation, unfortunately, did not accept this truth. Thus, they were broken off of the, quote, root and fatness of the olive tree, unquote. The faithful Jews who believed in the deliverer stayed in the olive tree, and Gentile believers were grafted into the church founded by Christ and the 12 apostles. This is the remnant of Israel. The ingathering of both Jew and Gentile constitutes the all Israel of God's saving grace.
That's right. It is extremely clear that ethnic and racial Israel has nothing to do with, quote, all Israel being saved, unquote. How do dispensationalists misconstrue the truth of Romans 11, verses 25 to 27?
How do they misconstrue Romans 11, 25 through 27?
How do they do it?
They misconstrue the words "until" in verse 25, "so" in verse 26, and Paul's quotation of Isaiah. The root of the threefold misconception is their interpretation of the word "so." Dispensationalists make verses 25 through 27 say the following. Let's take a look at this. 25. Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Verse 26, and then, notice the change that I made here on purpose. And then, in the Greek here, for then means at that time, and then, meaning at that time, all Israel will be saved, as it is written. The deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. Let's stop here. Dispensationalists treat the word "so," which means in this manner, they treat the word "so" as if it meant then. This means Israel has been blinded up to or as far as a certain period of time, and after this period, all Israel will be saved. Dispensationalists then move on the conclusion that Paul's quotation of Isaiah is future from Christ's first advent, confirming the idea that after the fullness of the Gentiles, as a distinct dispensation, then Israel will be saved. Now, if we were to diagram the dispensational view on this, it would appear as follows. I'm looking at this diagram. We have a depiction of the cross going up to the 1,000 years. Prior to the 1,000 years, we have this 7-year period. Now, notice this. We have the 7-year tribulation, then we have the 1,000 years, and then we have the new earth. Okay, this is the way they look at it right here. Between the cross and the 1,000 years, this period right here represents the, quote, until the fullness of the Gentiles, unquote. Now, at the beginning of the 1,000 years, that represents the, quote, then all Israel shall be saved, unquote. And they use Isaiah 59:20 to represent that future occurrence. So take a look at this pattern very carefully. Between the cross and the 1,000 years, that is the period of the fullness of the Gentiles. At the beginning of the 1,000 years, we have the we have the period that all Israel will be saved. And of course, the all Israel, according to dispensationalism, is national Israel.
That's dispensational conjecture, and it is not in harmony with Romans 11, verses 25 to 27. Paul did not use the word then. He didn't use such a word as a conjunction with the word until to represent another dispensation of salvation for national Israel after the filling up of the Gentiles, placing Isaiah's, quote, future from his day.
That is correct. And let's take a look at Paul's real outline in the following diagram. Now, in front of me I have a diagram. Notice that we have the cross of Christ. And notice that there is a timeline going up to the 1,000 years in the new earth. As we can see, this diagram looks different than the dispensational version. Notice on top of the cross we have Isaiah 59:20. And why is that the case? Paul recoined the words to Zion in Isaiah 59:20 to from Zion. He recoined the words to Zion to from Zion. And why did he do that? To illustrate that the deliverer had already come to Zion with salvation. Isaiah 59:20 does not pertain to the millennium. It pertains to the cross of Calvary. Like I said a moment ago, the deliverer came to Zion and turned ungodliness away from Jacob on the cross. Now let's go to the next part of this diagram. Notice between the cross and the 1,000 years, we have, quote, blindness has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in, unquote. In other words, blindness has happened to national Israel until the completion of the filling up has taken place. And also notice that between the cross and the 1,000 years, we have, quote, so in this way, meaning in this manner, all Israel will be saved, unquote. What does this mean? Between the cross and the 1,000-year period, blindness has happened to national Israel until the completion of the filling up of the Christian church with both Jews and Gentiles has taken place. And in this way, in this manner, all Israel will be saved. None of these propositions have anything whatsoever to do with a time frame or another dispensation after the second coming of Christ. Not at all.
Well, that makes sense. It's like you said, the root of the dispensational problem with those verses is that they make the word so to have the same meaning as the word then. They also miss Paul's change of Isaiah 59:20 and throw Isaiah's prophecy into the distant future where it does not belong. In fact, dispensationalists like to throw things into the future where they don't belong.
The fact of the matter is this. Paul quotes Isaiah's future expectation of ungodliness being taken away from Jacob as a confirmation of the all Israel being saved in the manner of the present remnant of the election of grace seen in the olive tree, containing both Jews and Gentiles. National Israel will stay blind until this manner of saving Israel through the remnant is completed. There is nothing to indicate that a restoration of the physical nation of Israel precedes the until. The until is an end in itself. Even if Romans 11 supported dispensationalism, which it does not, the majority of Paul's writings in the New Testament confirm Israel's second gathering as the present fulfillment in the church. And we're speaking in the context of the Christological fulfillment. Note this clearly. The olive tree containing both Jew and Gentile was not projected as a future event from Paul's day. No, no, no. The olive tree itself was not projected as a future occurrence after some temporary interrupted dispensation. Not at all. The olive tree was the present reality in Paul's day, which coincides with his description of the church body in Ephesians 2, verses 11 through 21. That all the walls of distinction between Jew and non-Jew have been done away with. I ask the audience to underscore this fact right here. All the walls of distinctions being broken down between Jew and non-Jew, and all being brought into one body by the cross, is exactly what Paul meant when he said, in this way the all Israel is being saved. This means that the church is the olive tree, thus the church is Israel. If there was any hope for national Israel's restoration in Romans 11, it was that she would be grafted into the church, where there was already in existence both Jews and Gentiles, according to the projected hopes of the prophets.
Yeah, DS, Romans 11, verse 25 to 27 was probably the only leg they could stand on to support their belief system. But even these scriptures don't support them. Dispensationalism is a total deception and is ruining people's salvation as well as people's lives on this planet.
Mike, dispensationalism is a bloodthirsty apostasy, teaching mythological and dangerous theologies. Dispensationalism does not need to have power in Washington. Dispensationalism has really no biblical justification to support the state of Israel in the manner they do. As long as dispensationalists are able to influence foreign policy with a ridiculous system of theology, be prepared for serious problems to arise in the world. I got big news. The day is coming when dispensationalists will find themselves left behind, not secretly raptured, to witness the fruits of their stupidity, while people in droves will ask them the simple question, where are all the promises of your religious system? We plead with the audience, get out of dispensationalism now. It is the hell-bound system of the false prophet. Get out because the leaders know that they are lying to the people. Get out so that your garments will not be stained with the deaths of people in the name of false prophecy. Get out so that you are not partakers with the sins of Babylon. Mike, it has been good discussing the issues that have been discussed. I will see you next time.
Okay, DS, thanks for teaching today on Hearing the Truth. And we can all learn truth from this program. This wraps up the 4-part series on the Israel of God. Comments or questions can be emailed to either DS or myself.